So this is going to be the short how I lost my faith video, which every atheist seems to have up on their channel. So in brief, I was born and raised semi-Catholic. I did all the usual things: baptism, communion, confirmation. Communion, by the way, for all of those of you that are Catholics. That's the winner, so that's where you make lots of money off your relatives. So that's a good time to quit. But I went on further than that. I went till I was probably about 20 or so. But to be frank, my religion was probably more deist than any particular kind of Christianity. And my parents were, I guess, what you would consider extremely liberal Christians, so they did not really, there was no literalism, as a matter of fact. If anything, the Bible was not ever discussed. It was very much a matter of all religions are right, we all worship the same God, and atheists, well, didn't really talk about that either. So it was pretty much a kumbaya, and the God is about love and everyone's happy. So yeah, that was my growing up, and I would have to say it took nothing away from any of the religion classes or the bit of kind of those kids' Bibles that I went through. I found some of the stories pretty interesting, lions and things, kind of cool. Alright drawings, and I had kind of, I wanted to like religion and Christianity, so, but I didn't really take anything away from any of that. So when it came to things like evolution or various other things, I never had any conflict. For me, I would just side with science and then apply the tremendous amount of rationalization, the usual, well, the Bible talks about evolution, it just does so in a metaphorical way, and blah blah blah, that you do when you basically trying to justify your beliefs. So I guess, a fair question of people that had a religious background like mine is, well, if you didn't really believe any of the texts, if you didn't think they were convincing at the time, then how come you paid any heed to whatsoever? How come you believed in a God? And I would have to say for myself, and I believe for many other religious people, I can't really speak for them, but I have a very strong sense that is a lot of the reason why a lot of people are religious. It was that kind of positive mental effect that believing that there's a God that makes things right and that will make everything turn out good in the end has on one's mind. It's like, that whatever you do, whatever mistakes you make, none of that's final. All of that really in the end will just be towards something great, because as long as, you have good in your heart, or you come around before you die, at least. My personal view was, even if you die evil, you still get more chances. You're not just going to wind up in hell forever, but either way, I know everything can basically be fixed. That was my opinion. And God was the means to do that. So God was the instrument of fixing things. And of course, He was the instrument of fixing the world. He was also the instrument of fixing the things in my life that I didn't like. And so, yeah, I moved around a lot when I was a kid, and I'm not talking about moving around in my home, in my country of birth, which is Germany, but I moved to Southeast Asia when I was 10, and we'd move every 3 years for the next 10 years. And so I was a very shy, introverted kid. That was very, very difficult on me. I did not make friends easily. I really struggled with that. I struggled with, with social interaction in general. And so it was difficult for me this time in those respects. So having a presence, a friend that was there for me was very, very positive. So obviously I had my family, and they were the most important thing to me, but that was an additional kind of pillar of strength for me. And I'd often, pray myself to sleep, which, thinking about it, sounds kind of sad, and I guess I wish I could go back and, cheer myself up a little. Just, it's not going to be so bad, but I was an anxious little kid, and talking to someone and going to sleep, and it worked. And basically that to me was religion. It just worked. I felt there was someone listening on the other end. It made me feel better. Yes, the neighbor's dogs are having an interesting conversation. So that was it. And I think that's why it's so hard to convince many Christians, because, even if they're very liberal and none of the text makes any real sense to them, they still have that feeling that it's really working for them and it's really making them feel better. And in those circumstances, if they're really liberal Christians and it's not doing any harm, I'm inclined to just say, okay, well, whatever, I don't think you have good cause to believe it, but if everyone were like that, I wouldn't be discussing religion ever again. I just literally wouldn't. I think it would be more negative than positive to disillusion those people, as long as those beliefs weren't affecting the rest of their rational thinking, which I guess can be a problem. So the reason why I turned away from faith is that the two pillars of faith that I did have, which was became shaky and I lost. So the first of those was just this belief that the world is good, God is improving everything, and it'll all be solved. Growing up, I think a major part of that, especially for kids that are, for people that have very sensitive, that are very, that feel very strongly about certain things, and that feel very bad about things that happen to other people. I think one of the things that growing up involves for us is realizing that the world is in fact a neutral place. It can be a good place, there can be fairness in places, but there can also be terrible injustice, there can be terrible suffering, and there seems to be nothing that's trying to really balance those things out, aside from the effort of humans that I really respect very highly for that. I wasn't able to believe anymore after understanding enough about the world that there was any such process. And some Christians, not so much the liberal ones, more the conservative ones, will say, oh, it doesn't matter, heaven will sort it out. And I just have to say, to me, that's just not good enough. I mean, I don't understand suffering all that much. I mean, I've had a fairly charmed life by the standards of most people on this earth, especially considering, how many people live in abject poverty and so on and so forth. But still, I understand suffering enough to know that it is in fact really, 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 really bad, and can be a terrible thing to feel very, very bad about the world and yourself. Or to just, be in horrible pain. I mean, it's just bad. It's not a good thing. So a gigantic, beautiful entity that wants everyone's well-being would not permit this. So I guess this is basically the problem of evil, which some people find unconvincing. I have always found it very convincing, and I still find it convincing. I mean, I might do a video on the problem of evil and some ways around it that I can come up with. But in the end, I think none of them are good enough to at least support the notion that God is good and therefore I should believe in him. So that pillar was gone. The second pillar was a more personal and, I guess, self-centered pillar, which was the support that it was giving me in feeling better about myself, and when I was in emotional distress, taking me away from that. And the simple fact there was, I grew up and I started to realize, I started to really, as a kid I was always kind of fine by myself. In the schoolyard, I could just walk around and come up with stories in my head and just do stuff like that. But eventually, the total lack of, not total, but yeah, I mean, I felt a very strong social kind of deficit. And I felt bad about myself for that reason. I wasn't having high quality social contact with other people. And I realized, my faith wasn't the reason for why I was like that, but it was certainly one of the reasons that was keeping me like that. Because, yes, I felt that things would be better and that, they'd be improved. And that was precisely the feeling that was keeping me from making the most painful moves. Of exposing myself to situations that I felt really, really, really uncomfortable with. For me, it was social situations. And by not doing that, by thinking things would get better, I was just not moving forward. And as I got older, not moving forward, I started to realize what that meant is I was just leaving where I wanted to be in terms of myself, my own happiness, my own fulfillment, further and further behind. It wasn't an automatic thing. No one was guaranteeing me happiness. Even if I was trying to be a good person in certain respects, in other regards, if I didn't also work on those, that the two things wouldn't somehow complement each other necessarily. So just because I was trying to be a nice person, that would not make me a social person, for example. And so I started spending time looking at other ideas, looking at philosophical ideas, looking at Buddhism, which to me is a philosophical idea. I accept that the Buddha had lots of metaphysical ideas as well. I don't care. I treat it as a purely philosophical system, as which it works for me very well. And so, yeah, once I did that, and once I started really exposing myself in lots of different situations, that started to work. I started to make actual progress in things that had always been terribly difficult for me. And I realized that progress was in no way due to some higher being, Jesus comforting me, in no way contributed to the progress I made as a human being. And that was just it. I mean, my faith had never been rational. I'd never bought any of the rational arguments for it. It had been an entirely emotional connection to this imaginary friend that could make me feel better. And I realized that it had really become more of a liability. It had become a kind of pathological dependency on something, and it was just holding me back from actually doing the things I needed to do. And I mean, that's basically the end of my story. That's the end of my losing my faith story. And since then, things haven't just gotten better magically. It's not like I figured this out and then I put in a week or two of solid work and now I'm perfectly happy. No, there have been big setbacks. I've been happy, unhappy. I've been in situations where I thought I was going the right way and then I made some choices and I ended up being fairly unhappy for a fairly long time, having to stick with the choice I'd made. And but I think that's part of the human condition. Some people might be born lucky enough and brought up well enough that they can avoid a lot of that. My upbringing was very helpful, by the way. My parents did a great job. But I think there's always a certain amount of self-improvement that's left to do. And that's just what I'm working through now. I'm trying to become a better person, a more sane person, a happier person. I'm trying to figure out what exactly I want to do with my life, which, I don't know, it's always a problem that I was just pushing away and thinking I'd figure out tomorrow, things like that. And religion plays no part in that. And ever since my emotional connection to religion has been broken, I've sometimes looked back with regret to the times where I could just lift myself out of a bad situation just based on the fact that I thought that it would get better because of Jesus. But at the same time, I think that this is a far healthier path because I'm actually doing something about the problems rather than just trying to make myself feel better about the problems I'm having. So yeah, that's my losing my faith story. I hope it's proved interesting to whoever comes across it. And yeah, check out other videos on my channel. I'd love to hear from you if you have anything to say. From Australia, goodbye for now.